After 2 weeks living with my daughter-in-law's family, she slapped me. She said, "Clean that floor properly." Everyone laughed while I held back tears. Just as she handed me the mop again, my military son walked through the door. He saw the handprint on my face and everything changed. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." We're a distant cousin they barely knew, not the woman who had raised the man Romy married. After 2 weeks of living under the same roof with my daughter-in-law and her parents, she slapped me across the face and hissed, "Clean that floor properly, soon." The sting burned more in my pride than in my skin. Laughter echoed around me, hers, her mother's, her father's, and I swallowed my tears because I refused to let them see me break. When my son finally walked through the door in his military uniform, their laughter turned into loud, exaggerated greetings. They screamed with delight at his arrival, but no one noticed the ache still trembling inside me. My name is Viola. I'm 64 years old. And never in all my life did I imagine I'd end up on my knees, scrubbing another woman's kitchen floor like a servant while choking back humiliation. Yet here I was, bent over the linoleum, trying to make it gleam under the harsh ceiling light. Standing above me was Romy, my daughter-in-law, watching every move I made as if she were my warden. "You missed a spot, right there." She pointed with her perfectly manicured finger toward a corner I'd already wiped twice. Her voice was soft, honey sweet, the way she always spoke when other people were within earshot. But her eyes, sharp and cold, betrayed the contempt she couldn't quite hide. 2 weeks, that's all it had been since I moved into this house. 2 weeks since the medical bills from my husband's long cancer battle finally crushed me. 2 weeks since the bank stripped me of the little sanctuary we'd held onto for 37 years. 2 weeks since I became a widow without a home. My son Everett had been overseas when it all unraveled. By the time he returned and learned of my situation, I was already wandering with nowhere to go. Romy had been the one to offer a solution. Graciously, she called it, inviting me to stay at her parents' home just until we figured something out. I didn't realize that figuring something out meant turning me into their unpaid maid. Mrs. Viola, Patricia, Romy's mother, called from the living room where she lounged on the sofa, absorbed in her soap operas. "When you're done with that floor, could you scrub the upstairs bathroom? The toilet needs a good cleaning." "Of course," I answered softly, though my knees ached from kneeling on the hard tiles. I told myself to be thankful. Thankful for a roof, for meals, for not sleeping in a shelter. Gratitude. That word circled in my mind like a mantra I no longer believed. Because with each passing day, gratitude became harder to swallow. Yesterday, Romy had picked apart the way I folded her laundry. The day before, she made me wash the dishes twice because she claimed one glass wasn't spotless. This morning, she'd handed me a neatly written list of chores in her delicate handwriting, as if I were staff instead of her husband's mother. "You know," she said casually, settling into a chair at the kitchen table while scrolling on her phone, "when Everett gets back from this training exercise, we really need to discuss your long-term plans. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." My hands froze on the mop handle. "I understand," I murmured. "I've been looking into options." "Good," she replied with a sigh, "because honestly, having an extra person in the house is stressful for everyone, especially someone who," she paused, deliberately weighing her words, "requires so much assistance." Assistance, the word cut through me like a blade. As if asking for a place to sleep after losing everything I had worked for meant I was some kind of burden. I wanted to remind her of all the years I raised Everett alone after his father walked out when he was only 8. I wanted to tell her about the 3 jobs I juggled so he could finish school, the sacrifices I made so he could wear that proud military uniform. I wanted to scream that I had given up every piece of my own future for his. But I bit my tongue, and I kept cleaning. "Oh, and Viola," Romy's voice turned sugary sweet again, which I had learned was never a good sign. "Could you be more careful, likely, with the dishes? You chipped one of Mother's good plates yesterday." I hadn't chipped anything, but I nodded anyway. "I'll be more careful." The afternoon crawled by. Wipe this, organize that, be sure not to touch the expensive items. By evening, my back was screaming and my hands were raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. But I had checked off every item on Romy's list. I had just finished mopping the entryway when voices drifted in from the living room. Patricia and her husband had invited neighbors over for coffee. Their laughter floated into the hall, followed by sharp fragments of conversation. Such a burden. Not sure how long we can. Never thought we'd have to. My chest tightened. They were talking about me. I forced myself to focus on the mop, on the steady rhythm of cleaning, anything to drown out their words. Viola, Romy's voice cut through my thoughts. Bring coffee for our guests. I dried my hands, prepared a tray with their best china, the set I had been warned not to touch unless absolutely necessary, and carried it carefully into the living room. 4 neighbors sat chatting with Romy's parents, all smiles. Oh, how wonderful, one woman gushed when I set down the tray. You're so lucky to have help around the house. Patricia laughed lightly. Well, it's just temporary. Viola here lost her home and needed somewhere to stay. The way she said it, so casual, almost dismissive, made it sound like I was some charity case picked off the streets. Heat rose to my face, but I forced a polite smile and retreated to the kitchen. As I put the coffee back in the cupboard, I heard Patricia's voice again, louder this time. The poor thing tries, but honestly, she doesn't know how to keep a proper household. Yesterday, she even used the wrong cleaner on my hardwood floors. Laughter rippled across the room. My hands tightened around the coffee canister until my knuckles turned white. Mother, be nice, Romy chimed in, though her tone carried no weight of real reproach. She's doing her best, but I admit it's been an adjustment having someone here who doesn't understand our routines. Of course, dear, Patricia replied. We're just grateful we can help family in need. Family in need, as if I were a distant cousin they barely knew, not the woman who had raised the man Romy married. I finished tidying the kitchen and started toward the stairs when Romy appeared in the hallway. Oh, Viola, one more thing. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Could you clean this floor again? I noticed some spots you missed. I looked down at the entryway I had just scrubbed until it shone. It was spotless. I don't see any. There, she interrupted, pointing to a patch identical to the rest. And over there. That corner looks streaky. Something in her tone made me lift my head. She was smiling faintly, eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. She was enjoying this. Of course, I whispered, turning back toward the supply closet. Actually, she said, stopping me in my tracks, let's make sure you do it right this time. She followed me as I dragged out the mop and bucket again. My knees screamed in protest as I knelt, wringing out the mop with trembling hands. I gripped the bucket handle for balance, my pride crumbling piece by piece. I steadied myself as I pushed back up on aching knees, the mop heavy in my hands. You know, Viola, Romy said in that practiced, sing-song voice of hers, as if we were 2 girlfriends chatting over coffee instead of me scrubbing her floor for the 3rd time that day. I really think you need to try harder with this. A job worth doing is worth doing well, don't you agree? I gave the smallest nod, my eyes fixed on the damp wood beneath me. In the living room, the laughter had swelled. Someone had launched into a funny story. In their amusement, spilled out like warm light I wasn't allowed to step into. When I was growing up, Romy continued, her tone sliding from casual to sharp, my mother always told me that if you can't do something properly, you shouldn't bother doing it at all. Her voice lost the last trace of sweetness, hardening like steel. Maybe that's why you're in this position to begin with. My hands went still on the mop handle. Excuse me? I asked, though I already knew the knife she was about to twist. I'm just saying. She gave a careless shrug, studying her nails as though the state of her manicure mattered more than my dignity. If you'd managed your money better, taken proper care of your home, or planned for the future, maybe you wouldn't be forced to depend on other people now. Each word hit me square in the chest, as though I were to blame for the cancer that had stolen my husband's health, as though I'd chosen the towering medical bills that bled us dry, as though it were my fault that the world's cruel economy had crushed us despite all my years of work. I did my best, I whispered, barely trusting my voice to hold. Did you, though? Romy tilted her head, studying me like I was some curious insect under glass. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made a string of poor decisions that landed you right here. From the living room, the laughter rose again, cruel now, distorted, as if mocking my shame. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of work, raising my son into a good man, And now here I was, being dissected like a failure by a woman half my age. You're too slow, Romy snapped suddenly. The guests can see you through the doorway, and it's humiliating. They probably think we don't know how to supervise our domestic help. Domestic help. The phrase struck harder than any blow could have. I forced my body to move faster, but it betrayed me. My knees ached like fire. My back screamed with every twist, and my hands were cramped around the handle. This is ridiculous, Romy muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. You can't even clean a simple floor. And then it happened. I was struggling to guide the mop around the corner near the entryway when Romy suddenly stepped in front of me. Move, she snapped. And before I could even react, her hand cracked across my cheek. The sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. My body staggered backward, the mop clattering to the ground. I caught myself against the wall, my cheek burning hot, tears springing before I could swallow them down. Clean the floor, Romy hissed, her voice stripped of every ounce of sweetness. It was jagged, vicious, brimming with cruelty she hadn't bothered to hide. And stop being so pathetic about it. The laughter in the living room died. Silence swelled, heavy and watchful. I felt their eyes on me. When I turned, I saw Patricia and her circle of guests clustered at the doorway, staring not with outrage, not with horror, but with delight. One of them was smiling. "Oh my," Patricia said, letting out a tinkling laugh. "Romy certainly knows how to handle difficult situations. Sometimes you have to be firm with people who don't understand boundaries." Another guest chimed in, chuckling. They were laughing while a 64-year-old woman was slapped across the face by her daughter-in-law, laughing at me. I stood frozen, my hand pressed against my burning cheek, humiliation coursing through every vein. I wasn't just unwanted here. I was their entertainment. Romy bent down, snatched the mop off the floor, and shoved it back into my trembling hands. "Try again," she ordered coldly. "And this time, do it right." I gripped the handle, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. Not in front of them. I would not give them that victory. As I knelt again on the same spotless floor, I heard the slam of a car door outside. Heavy, familiar footsteps thudded across the porch. The front door swung open, and there stood Everett. My son, in his fatigues, duffel slung over his shoulder, home early from his training exercise. His eyes swept the scene in an instant. Me kneeling on the floor with mop in hand, tears threatening to spill, my cheeks still glowing red. Romy looming over me, arms folded. Patricia's guests at the doorway, amusement still lingering in their eyes. "What the hell is going on here?" Everett's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that crackled with fury underneath. And then the screaming started. Romy and her family, their voices rising in a frantic chorus. "What the hell is going on here?" Everett roared again, and the hallway shook with it. I had never heard my son like that, not even as a paw at his angriest. This was the voice of a soldier, a commander, a man who had seen war and would tolerate no injustice. But Romy, instead of backing down, rushed straight into her performance. "Everett, thank God you're home," she sobbed, throwing herself toward him with sudden tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your mother has been impossible. I don't know what to do with her anymore." Impossible? Everett's eyes didn't leave me, still kneeling, still clutching the mop, my cheek burning with her handprint. His voice was ice. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "She refuses to listen," Romy pressed on, her tone slipping into that manipulative whine she saved for sympathy. "I try to give her simple tasks, just to make her feel useful, but she argues with me about everything. And just now she was so disrespectful, I had to—" "You had to what?" Everett's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. He stepped closer, his jaw tightening as his gaze landed on the mark across my face. "Did you hit my mother?" "I barely touched her," Romy stammered. She was being completely unreasonable, and "You hit my mother." Everett's explosion ripped through the house. Everyone flinched. Patricia's polished guests scrambled to gather their belongings, their laughter gone, replaced with the urgent need to escape. "Mom, get up," Everett said, his voice softer now but shaking with rage. "Right now." I pushed myself up, my knees aching from the long hours on the floor. Everett caught my arm, immediately steadying me. The gentleness of his touch against the storm in his voice made my throat tighten with unshed tears. Now he turned back to Romy, his expression carved from fury. Explain to me why my mother was on her hands and knees, scrubbing your floor like a servant. She's not a servant, Patricia interjected hastily from the doorway. From the doorway of the room, Romy tried desperately to smooth over the tension that had already turned heavy and suffocating. Her voice was sharp but carried that brittle edge of someone scrambling to control a situation slipping out of her hands. She's family, she said quickly. She's just been helping out around the house while she's here. That's all. Everett's eyes scanned the immaculate entryway. Not a speck of dust, not a single thing out of place. He turned back to his wife, his jaw tight. This floor is spotless, he said flatly. Why was she cleaning it? Because she missed spots the first time, Romy shot back, her chin tilting upward with a kind of defiance that felt rehearsed, defensive. I'm just trying to maintain standards in this house. Standards, Everett repeated the word slowly, like it tasted sour in his mouth, like it was a poison he didn't want to swallow. And your standards include striking a 64-year-old woman? I told you, Romy snapped. I barely touched her. His eyes darkened, voice sharp. I can see the handprint on her face. And then Romy made the biggest mistake of all. Instead of softening, instead of apologizing or showing even a shred of remorse, she folded her arms across her chest and said, cold as stone, well, maybe if she did things right the first time, I wouldn't have to correct her. The silence that followed hit like an earthquake. It was vast, echoing, suffocating. Even Patricia's remaining guests, who had been hovering awkwardly on the edges of the scene, went rigid, sensing that something irreversible had just been unleashed. Correct her. Everett's voice had dropped so low that everyone had to lean in, straining to catch his words. Did you just say you needed to correct my mother? Everett, honey, Romy tried to backtrack, her tone softening but still defensive. You don't understand how challenging this has been. No, he cut her off, steel in his tone. You don't understand. He took a step toward her, and for the first time since I'd known Romy, I saw it, real fear flickering in her eyes. This woman, Everett said, pointing toward me, his voice rising with a raw kind of reverence, raised me completely on her own after my father walked out when I was 8 years old. Do you know what she did to keep us alive? To keep me clothed and fed? Romy's face drained of color, but she said nothing. She worked 3 jobs, Everett thundered, each word striking the air like a hammer. 3 jobs, Romy. She scrubbed office buildings at night, spent her days in a factory, and did people's laundry on weekends. And all of that, every ounce of it, was so I could have food on the table and clothes on my back. Everett, please, I started, my voice breaking, but he lifted a hand, his focus still locked on Romy. No, Mom, she needs to hear this. He stepped closer to his wife, his voice a mix of fury and grief. Do you know why she took that factory job? Because it paid 50 cents more per hour than anything else she could find. Do you know what happened there? What that job cost her? I felt my chest tighten. I had never told him the whole story. She lost 3 fingers in a machine accident when I was 15, Everett said, his voice cracking. 3 fingers, gone, because the safety equipment was broken, and she was too afraid to report it. She couldn't risk losing that job. She needed the money to buy me school clothes. Romy's eyes widened in shock. She had never known. She had never seen my damaged hand without gloves, or the careful ways I kept it hidden. And did she ever complain? Everett pressed, his voice like a blade. Did she ever guilt me for the sacrifices she made? No, she lied. She told me those bandages were from a kitchen accident, and then she went right back to work the next week. That's the kind of woman you just slapped. Tears blurred my vision, spilling freely. Everett had never spoken about our early years with such piercing clarity. Hearing my pain in his voice was both unbearable and healing all at once. She put me through school, Everett continued, his voice now steady with righteous fire. She saved every cent she could so I could go to college, so I could commission into the military as an officer instead of enlisting. She gave up dating, she gave up her own happiness, her own life, just so I could have a chance at mine. I didn't know, Romy whispered, her voice trembling. No, Everett cut her off like a lash. You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask. You never cared to learn a single thing about the woman who made me the man you claimed to love. Finally, Patricia found her voice, soft and wavering. Everett, dear, I think you are overreacting. Romy was only trying. Trying to what? Everett snapped, whirling toward his mother-in-law. Trying to humiliate my mother? To reduce her to your personal maid? To strip her of her dignity? Now see here, young man. Patricia's husband interjected, his voice stern. You can't come into our house and… Your house? Everett's laugh was bitter, jagged. This is where you've been keeping my mother? For 2 weeks, in your basement? Treating her like a servant? The guest room isn't in the basement, Patricia protested weakly. Show me, Everett demanded, his tone flat, unyielding. The air grew heavy again as Patricia hesitated, then reluctantly led us down a narrow staircase. What greeted us was no guest room, was a showing me my guest room. It was a storage space, a low ceiling that forced Everett to duck, a cot shoved into the corner, the stench of mildew clinging to the air. No window, no proper ventilation, just damp concrete walls pressing in. You've been making my mother sleep down here? Everett's voice was tight, trembling with rage. It's perfectly adequate, Patricia said defensively. She told us she was grateful for any space we could offer. Everett turned to me then, and I saw something fracture in his expression. Mom, he whispered, why didn't you tell me? You were away for training, I said softly. I didn't want to bother you with… Bother me? His voice cracked as he raked his hands through his hair. Mom, you're never a bother. You're my mother. You are the most important person in my life. Behind us, Romy made a faint protesting sound. That's right, Everett said, pivoting sharply to face her. More important than you. More important than anyone. This woman sacrificed everything for me, and you've treated her like garbage. I was only trying to help her feel useful, Romy murmured, her voice shrinking smaller and smaller. By forcing her onto her knees to scrub floors? By slapping her in front of your parents' friends? By humiliating her? Everett's fury erupted again, booming through the basement. It wasn't like that, Romy started. It was exactly like that, he roared. I saw it with my own eyes. My mother crying on her knees, your handprint across her face, while a room full of people laughed. That's what you did. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And you know what the worst part is? Everett's voice sank to a chilling quiet, that dangerous calm that made everyone lean back in fear. Even after all of it, she was grateful. Grateful for a roof over her head. That's who she is. That's the kind of family you married into, Romy. A family that takes care of each other. A family that respects each other. A family that would rather die than watch one another suffer. He swept his gaze over all of them. But that's not who you are, is it? Romy's face crumpled. Everett, please, I love you. I love our family. I was just stressed with having an extra person in the house. An extra person? Everett stared at her, disbelief painted across his face. That extra person is my mother. She's not some stranger we dragged in off the street. She is the woman who made me who I am. I know that. I just know. He cut her off, final and firm. You don't know. If you did, if you truly understood, you never would have treated her this way. Then he turned to me, his expression softening for the first time all evening. Mom, get your things. We're leaving. Where will we go? I asked, my voice small, fragile. I don't care if we have to sleep in my car, he said, his voice firm with conviction. We're not staying here another night. I can't stay here another minute. You can't just walk away, Romy cried, her voice breaking as though every word was clawing its way out of her chest. We're married. That means we're supposed to work through problems together. Everett's eyes locked on hers, hard and unflinching, his silence stretching until it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Finally he spoke, his voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. Some problems can't be worked through, Romy. Some things are unforgivable. The weight of his words dropped into the room like a heavy shroud at a graveside. I sat frozen, watching the storm unravel, and as I looked at my daughter-in-law's pale, trembling face, I understood. Life as we knew it was about to break apart. But for the first time in 2 unbearable weeks, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Silence swelled in the cramped, damp-smelling basement until it threatened to choke us all. Everett stood rigid, chest heaving with rage he was barely keeping in check. Romy, meanwhile, looked as though she were watching her entire life collapse in front of her eyes. Please, she whispered, stretching out a hand to touch his arm as though a single brush of her fingers could undo the damage. Can we talk about this? Just the two of us. Everett jerked away like her touch had scalded him. His eyes blazed. Privately? You mean the way you privately decided to abuse my mother for 2 weeks while I was gone? Her face drained of color. I wasn't abusing her. Then what would you call it? His voice was cold enough to frost over steel. Making her sleep in a damp basement, forcing her to scrub floors she'd already cleaned, slapping her in front of your parents' friends. Romy's cheeks flushed crimson, the truth written across her face even before she spoke. She stumbled over her defense, voice thin and trembling. She wasn't doing things properly. Someone had to. To what? Everett snapped, each word like a lash. Teach her. Correct her. His tone dripped disgust. My mother raised me by herself. She worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. She kept a household running for decades without anyone's help. And you think she doesn't know how to clean a floor? That was when Patricia, Romy's mother, made a grave mistake. Well, honestly, Everett, she said with a nervous laugh that sounded painfully out of place, people from different backgrounds sometimes have different standards of, well, different backgrounds. Everett turned on her with such fury that Patricia, a woman rarely intimidated, actually took a step backward. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. And what exactly are you implying about my mother's background? Patricia faltered, realizing too late that she had wandered into dangerous ground. Her words tangled together, desperate and shaky. I just meant that perhaps she's not used to maintaining a home of this. That single word hit like a slap across my face. Caliber. My cheeks burned with humiliation I thought I'd buried years ago. But Everett's reaction was volcanic. Caliber, he repeated slowly, his voice rumbling like an approaching storm. You mean because we were poor? Because my mother couldn't afford a house like this? Patricia's husband stepped in quickly, raising a hand as though to douse the fire. Now, Everett, let's all calm down. But Everett's voice cut him off, slicing through the dank air of the basement like a blade. No, let's not calm down. Let's talk about this so-called caliber. My mother's house may not have been as big as this one, but it was spotless, it was warm, and it was filled with love. Can you say the same about this place? He gestured toward the basement where they had kept me, where the smell of mildew clung to the walls and shame lingered in every corner. His voice thundered on. You shove a 64-year-old woman into a basement that reeks of mold and call it hospitality. You work her like a servant and call it helping out. You humiliate her in front of guests and call it maintaining standards. And you dare to think you're better than us because you have more money? Everett, you're being unfair, Romy cried, but the desperation in her tone betrayed her. My parents opened their home to your mother when she had nowhere else to go. And then, with a sudden sharpness, she added, after she lied to you about her situation for months. The accusation cracked through the room like lightning. I looked at Everett, stunned, my heart pounding. What do you mean, lying? Everett's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving mine. Mom, when did you lose the house? I swallowed hard, shame tightening around my throat. 3 months ago, I whispered. But I told you not to worry, that I had somewhere to stay. With who? You told me you were staying with Mrs. Henderson from church. Heat rose to my cheeks. I was, at first, but then her daughter came to visit and needed the room, so where were you staying before you came here? His question hung in the air, heavy, inescapable. I couldn't meet his eyes. The truth was too humiliating to admit. Mom, where were you staying? My voice barely made it past my lips. In my car. The words hit harder than any blow. Everett went utterly still, the color draining from his face. You were sleeping in your car? His voice was raw, barely more than a whisper. Just for a few days, I said quickly, rushing to soften the shameful truth. It wasn't that bad. The weather was mild, and I had a blanket. A few days? Everett's head snapped toward Romy, his eyes blazing with fury. How long did you know about this? Romy froze, her face pale and bloodless. What do you mean? Don't lie to me, Romy. How long did you know my mother was homeless? I didn't know she was sleeping in her car, Romy stammered, but you knew she'd lost the house. Silence. Answer me. Her voice cracked into a whisper. 2 months. I've known for 2 months. The betrayal hit Everett like a physical strike. He staggered back, shoulders heaving. 2 months? My mother has been homeless for 2 months, and you didn't tell me? You were deployed, Romy shot back, tears brimming in her eyes. There was nothing you could do from overseas. Nothing I could do? Everett's voice thundered, rattling the walls. I could have sent money. I could have made arrangements. I could have requested emergency leave. You were in the middle of an important mission, Romy argued, her voice breaking. More important than my mother? Everett's words carved through the room, and no one dared answer, because everyone knew the truth. For Everett, nothing was more important than family. His voice dropped to a deadly quiet. How did you find out? Romy's eyes flicked toward her parents, desperate for help, but none came. She called here looking for you. When? Right after you deployed. She was crying, saying she'd lost the house and didn't know what to do. She begged me to have you call her. My stomach twisted. I remembered that call too well. The desperation, the humiliation of reaching out, of begging. I'd swallowed every ounce of pride I had left. And what did you tell her? Everett asked, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. I told her you were busy and couldn't be disturbed. Romy's face crumpled, but she kept calling, every few days, always crying, always asking for you. Everett's face was carved from stone. For 2 months, my mother called you begging for help, and you never told me. I handled it, Romy said weakly. I told her she could stay here once you got back. You handled it? Everett's disbelief was almost laughter, except there was no humor in it. You handled it by letting her sleep in her car for 2 months while you pretended everything was fine? The truth came crashing down like a collapsing roof. Romy hadn't just hidden my suffering, she had actively blocked Everett from knowing, even when I was desperate and alone. Everett's eyes narrowed. There's more, isn't there? What else haven't you told me? Her silence was answer enough. What else, Romy? Her voice was nearly gone. She asked about borrowing a little money, just enough to help with a deposit on an apartment, and I told her we couldn't afford it. Everett laughed then, but the sound was jagged, broken. Couldn't afford it? I have $30,000 in savings, money I've been setting aside for our future. That money is for us, for our house, our family, Romy protested. My mother is my family. His words reverberated through the basement, sharp, final, undeniable. And in that moment, the room fell silent, heavy with a truth no one could escape. In that moment, I watched Romy's expression shift as the reality sank in. She had lost. She had gambled everything on Everett choosing her over me, and the gamble had failed. You let my mother sleep in her car, Everett said, his voice measured, each word carrying weight. For 2 months, while I had money sitting in the bank that could have helped her. You cut off her calls for help. You lied to me about her situation. And when you finally allowed her to come here, you treated her like a servant. He paused, scanning the room, letting the silence grow heavy. And you thought I'd never find out. Patricia's voice wavered. We were going to tell you once you were settled back home. Tell me what? Everett's voice sharpened. That you'd been abusing my mother? We weren't abusing her. Then what do you call making her sleep in a basement and hitting her when she didn't clean to your liking? His question cut through the air, leaving everyone silent. Everett's eyes shifted toward me, softening with regret and guilt. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have checked on you more. I should have called you directly instead of going through Romy. You were serving your country, I whispered. I didn't want to be a burden. You are never a burden, he said firmly. You're my mother. He reached for my hands, and I saw the flicker of shock when he noticed the fingers I'd lost. His jaw clenched, his voice thick with pain. I failed you. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. I trusted someone unworthy. I let her hurt you because I was too blind to see her for who she really was. His gaze turned back to Romy, colder than I had ever seen. Pack your things, he said quietly. Her face crumpled. What? Ever? No, you can't mean that. We're married. Couples fight. They work through it. This isn't a fight, Everett answered, voice steady. This is you revealing exactly who you are. And I don't like it. I can change, she pleaded. I can do better. You had 2 months, he shot back. 2 months while my mother was homeless, calling you for help. And instead of being better, you chose cruelty. He turned to me. Come on, Mom, let's get your things. Romy clutched his arm. You're making a mistake. Your mother is manipulating you, forcing you to choose. Everett stopped, his eyes cutting into hers. No, Romy, I'm not choosing between you and my mother. I'm choosing between right and wrong, and you're wrong. We climbed the basement stairs together. Behind us, Romy began to sob, this time real tears, not the practiced ones she had wielded for sympathy. But it was too late. Some betrayals leave a permanent scar, and Everett's trust in her was broken beyond repair. The drive to Everett's apartment was thick with silence, the only sound Romy's muffled cries echoing from the house we'd left behind. Everett's hands strangled the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white, his jaw twitching as if he were fighting to contain an avalanche of emotion. I should have known, he said at last. Everett, you couldn't have. Yes, I could have. His voice cracked with guilt. There were signs, Mom, little things. The way she talked about people with less money, the way she sneered at waiters and cashiers. I told myself she just had high standards, but that wasn't it. She was showing me who she was, and I refused to see it. I wanted to reach out, to soothe him, but I knew this was something he had to face on his own. As we passed the familiar streets of my hometown, memories pressed in where I had raised him, where I had built a life with his father before everything fell apart. I'm not going back to her, Everett said suddenly. Son, you don't need to decide that right now. You're upset. No, Mom. He pulled into his apartment complex, turned to me, and his voice was steady with finality. This isn't something I'll get over. What she did, what she allowed, you don't recover from that. I studied his face and recognized the same stubborn determination I'd once carried in my own. Marriage is hard work, I murmured. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Everett said, cutting through my words. A mistake is forgetting to call back or saying something thoughtless. What she did was deliberate. She made a choice to let you suffer, and she made it again every single day for 2 months. He was right, though my heart resisted the truth. I'd spent years making excuses for people, trying to see the good, but sometimes there was no good to find. What about your life together, your plans? I asked quietly. His silence stretched before he answered. What life? What plans? I thought I was building something real, with someone who shared my values, someone who understood loyalty, sacrifice, family. But I was wrong. Romy doesn't understand any of that. We sat in the car for a long moment, each of us lost in thought. Finally, Everett stepped out and came around to carry my single suitcase, the last of my belongings. His apartment was modest, simple, the home of a man who'd lived out of barracks too long to care about decoration. A couch, a television, a small table. But compared to that cold basement, it felt like the warmest place I'd ever been. You can have the bedroom, Everett said, placing my suitcase down. I'll take the couch. Absolutely not. I won't take your bed. Mom, no arguments. After 2 weeks on a basement cot, this couch will feel like a luxury suite. He smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen since he'd found me broken on that floor. All right, I said softly, but only for now. We'll figure something else out. That night, as I lay on his couch listening to the quiet sounds of him moving around in the bedroom, something stirred in me for the first time in months, hope. Since losing the house, my life had been about surviving day to day, never daring to imagine tomorrow. But here, wrapped in the steady strength of my son's love, I began to dream again. In the morning, Everett brewed coffee and toasted bread, and we sat together at his small table like we had when he was a boy, just the two of us against the world. I've been thinking, he said, his voice careful but resolute, about what we should do next. We? I asked. Yes, he said, meeting my eyes. We shall. You're not going through this alone anymore, Mom. I should never have let you face all of that alone. The thought weighed heavy in his voice as his hand trembled on the table. Without thinking, I reached across the small space between us, covering his hand with mine, trying to anchor him to the moment. You were serving your country, I reminded him softly. You were doing exactly what you were supposed to be doing. Maybe, Everett admitted, his eyes cast downward, but that doesn't change the fact that you needed me, and I wasn't here. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, there came a sharp knock at the door. Instantly, Everett's expression shifted. The warmth drained from his features, leaving only tension. His jaw tightened. Stay here, he murmured firmly. But I couldn't. I rose and followed him anyway, quiet but unwilling to be left behind. Through the peephole, we saw her, Romy, standing in the hallway. She hadn't even changed from the clothes she'd worn yesterday. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, her hair tangled and limp. The picture of someone who had cried until her body had nothing left to give. Everett, please. Her voice carried through the door, raw and desperate. I know you're in there. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Everett shot back, his voice edged with finality. Yes, there is, Romy insisted. I love you. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. No, he said, flat and cold. We can't. Please, just let me explain. Let me apologize properly. He glanced at me, Vicen, and I could see the war being fought inside him. Once he had loved this woman deeply enough to marry her, part of him wanted to give her the chance to make amends. But another part, the part shaped by watching his own mother humiliated, mistreated, diminished, couldn't forgive so easily. Finally, after a long silence, Everett sighed and unlocked the door. 5 minutes. Romy nearly stumbled inside. Her gaze flicked immediately to me, guilt heavy in her eyes. Viola, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I gave a small nod, but my lips remained pressed together. Her words felt hollow, rehearsed, like lines from a script, not the beating truth of her heart. I was stressed, she continued, turning toward Everett. Having another person in the house, trying to keep everything perfect for when you came home, it all became too much. I took it out on your mother, and I shouldn't have. Stressed? Everett's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet tone. You were stressed? So you decided to abuse my mother? I didn't abuse her. You made her sleep in a basement. You forced her to do menial chores. You slapped her. What would you call that? Romy's face twisted, the tears streaming again. I was trying to help her feel useful. I thought if she had responsibilities, she wouldn't feel like such a burden. The word landed like a physical blow, burden. I saw Everett's entire body stiffen, his eyes darkening further. He enunciated each word slowly, like it cost him to say them. My mother is not a burden. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. That's how you saw her, as a problem to manage until I came home to take care of it. Everett, please. And the lies, he cut her off. The 2 months you let her sleep in her car while you fed me, lies about her being fine. How do you explain that? Her shoulders shook. This time the tears seemed real, raw. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You were deployed, unreachable, and I thought... You thought what? Everett's voice cracked like a whip. That ignoring my mother's homelessness would somehow fix it? I was going to help her when you got back. I was going to... You were going to what? Keep treating her like a servant? Keep breaking her down piece by piece? That was when I finally spoke. Romy. My voice was quiet but steady. Both of them turned toward me. Do you remember what you said to me yesterday, right before you slapped me? She shook her head, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. She remembered every word. Mom, you told me maybe if I'd been better at managing my money, or taking care of my home, or planning for the future, then I wouldn't have to rely on others. I rose slowly to my feet, my spine straighter than it had been in months. Strength coursed through me, fragile but real. Do you remember saying that? I was upset. I didn't mean... Yes, you did mean it. That's what you really believe about me. That's what you've always believed, that I'm some kind of failure who brought all of this on myself. That's not true. It is true, and that's why your apologies mean nothing. That's why this can't be fixed with promises to change. I turned to Everett, then back to her. Some things can't be taken back. Some words can't be unsaid. But I love him, Romy cried, lunging toward Everett. I love you! No, I stepped between them firmly, my voice stronger than I'd expected. You don't love him. You love the idea of him. You love being able to tell people your husband is a soldier. You love the pride, the respect, the security that comes with his uniform. But you don't love him. That's not true, she protested. If you loved him, you would have loved the people who made him who he is. You would have respected the sacrifices behind his life. You would have seen me as a blessing, not a burden. Romy's lips parted, but no words came. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. And if you had truly loved him, I continued, my voice calm now, almost sorrowful, you never would have done anything to cause him this much pain. The truth settled heavy in the room, undeniable. Everett looked at the woman who had once been his wife, and I watched the last ember of love for her die in his eyes. I want you to leave, he said quietly, his voice final. Now, don't come back. Romy looked between us desperately, searching for any crack in the pillow of resolve. But there was none. The damage was irreparable, and we all knew it. After the door closed behind her, silence stretched between Everett and me. Are you okay? I asked at last. He paused, considering. I think I will be. It hurts, realizing I married someone capable of such cruelty. But I'd rather live with the truth than with lies. I'm sorry your marriage is ending because of me, I whispered. He shook his head. It's not ending because of you, Mom. It's ending because of who she chose to be when she thought no one was watching. That afternoon, Everett began making calls, first to a lawyer to start divorce proceedings, then to his commanding officer to update his emergency contacts and beneficiaries, finally to a realtor about finding a larger apartment, one with 2 bedrooms. You don't have to do that, I protested. I can find my own place. With what money? With what job? His voice wasn't cruel, only practical. Mom, you're 64. You've lost everything. There's no shame in letting your son help you get back on your feet. I don't want to be a burden, I murmured. His tone turned sharp, almost fierce. Don't you ever use that word about yourself again. You are not a burden. You're my mother. You're the woman who sacrificed everything to give me a good life. Now it's my turn to take care of you. That night, as I lay on his couch again, something inside me shifted. For the first time since losing my home, since becoming homeless, since those weeks of humiliation, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. I felt hope, and I felt pride in my son for defending what was right, and pride in myself for finally speaking the truth, instead of quietly enduring whatever scraps of dignity people decided to toss my way. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I allowed myself to believe in something brighter. There were still challenges ahead, new choices to make, new uncertainties waiting just around the corner. But that night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was safe, I was loved, I was no longer alone. And in that moment, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 3 weeks after leaving Romy's parents' house, Everett and I had somehow slipped into a rhythm that felt natural, almost startlingly so. He rose early each morning, leaving for base before the sun had fully broken the horizon. I spent my days searching for job postings, combing through apartment listings, and piecing myself back together bit by bit. My confidence, which had been systematically shredded during those awful weeks of humiliation, was slowly returning. The divorce papers had been filed, and Romy had been surprisingly silent since the explosive confrontation at Everett's apartment. I had braced myself for theatrics, for phone calls, for tearful scenes, for grand gestures meant to lure Everett back. But there had been nothing, not a word. It was as though she had simply evaporated from our lives. One evening over dinner at Everett's little kitchen table, he told me what he'd heard. Apparently she's back with her parents. Word is she's telling people I chose my mother over her. I set my fork down and gave him a long look. Well, I said slowly, that's not entirely untrue. It's completely untrue. His voice was steady, his eyes locked on mine. I didn't choose you over her. I chose right over wrong. I chose treating people with dignity instead of treating them like trash. She just happened to be on the wrong side of that choice. His words settled in me like a balm, though I didn't say anything. That same week, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. Mrs. Harrington? The voice on the other end was warm, polished, professional. This is Margaret Chen from Riverside Community Library. I understand you are looking for employment. My grip tightened on the phone. Yes, I am. Your son passed your name along to us, she continued. He mentioned you have experience in bookkeeping and administration. I turned toward Everett later that night, realizing he had been quietly working his network, reaching out to people who might have opportunities for someone my age. It was such a small act of faith, and yet to me, it felt monumental. The library, Margaret explained, was looking for someone part-time, managing volunteer programs and assisting with administrative tasks. I'd love to come in for an interview, I said, trying to keep my voice even, though excitement rushed through me like a spark catching fire. The interview was set for the following Tuesday. That weekend, I buried myself in the preparation, researching the library, rehearsing my answers, mapping out how decades of work and life experience might transfer to this new opportunity. For the first time in months, maybe years, I had something to look forward to. On Monday night, as I pressed the only truly professional outfit I still owned, a navy dress I had managed to rescue from the house, there was a knock at the door. Everett answered, and immediately a voice drifted down the hallway that made my blood run cold. I need to talk to Viola. Romy. I stepped out of the bedroom and found her in the doorway. She looked diminished somehow. The sharp, polished woman from 3 weeks earlier had disappeared. Her designer blouse was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, the skin under her eyes bruised with dark circles. What do you want? Everett's voice was ice. Please, she said, locking her eyes on mine. Just 5 minutes. I need to say something. Against my better judgment, I nodded. 5 minutes. She stepped inside, and the smell of alcohol drifted in with her. Not enough to make her drunk, but enough that it clung to her like a shadow. I've been thinking, she began. Her voice was unsteady, almost fragile. Thinking about what happened, about what you said. I stayed silent, waiting. You were right, she whispered, eyes fixed on the floor. About me not really loving Everett. About me loving the idea of being married to him more than I ever loved him himself. Everett shifted beside me, ready to speak, but I raised a hand to silence him. I wanted to hear her out. I wanted the picture-perfect military wife life, Romy continued, her words spilling out in jagged bursts. The respect, the admiration, the security. I wanted to walk into a party and say, my husband's a hero, and have people look at us like we were the perfect American family. She paused, wiped her nose with the back of her hand. But I didn't want the reality. I didn't want the deployments, the constant worry, or a man who would ever put his mother before his wife. I thought if I could just manage the inconvenient parts, hide them, control them, fix them, then I'd get the life I wanted. So you decided to manage me? I asked softly. Yes. The word broke out of her like a sob. I thought if I could just make you smaller, less important, less visible, then everything would be perfect when he came home. I told myself you were fine, that you were dramatic, difficult, but you weren't. You were grieving, you were terrified, you were desperate, and I made it worse because your pain was inconvenient for me. Tears streamed freely down her face now. The raw honesty in her words was brutal. For one aching moment, a part of me wanted to reach for her, to tell her it was okay, that people make mistakes. But a stronger part of me, the part that had clawed its way back to dignity, stayed silent. I don't expect forgiveness, she said finally, her voice breaking. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I understand now what I did, what I am. She turned to Everett, eyes red and swollen. And I wanted you to know you're better off without me. Your mother raised a good man, a man with values, with real love in his heart. I would have destroyed that eventually. And with that, she turned and left, leaving the door wide open behind her. Everett and I stared after her, caught in the heavy silence she left in her wake. That was unexpected, Everett said at last. Yes, it was. Does it change anything for you? I thought for a moment before answering. It helps, knowing she finally sees what she did. But no, it doesn't change anything. Some damage can't be undone, even with understanding. The next morning, I walked into Riverside Community Library for my interview, more confident than I had felt in months. Margaret Chen greeted me warmly. She was about my age, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Harrington, she said once we sat down in her office. And to my own surprise, I did. I spoke not only of my work experience, but of my life. The years of raising Everett alone, the countless jobs I had taken to make ends meet, the obstacles I had endured, the recent losses that had nearly broken me. I spoke openly, not with shame, but with a strange new pride. You've certainly weathered your share of hardships, Margaret said when I finished. How do you think those experiences would serve you in this position? I took a breath. When you've had to rebuild your life from nothing, you learn how vital places like this are. A library isn't just books on shelves. It's a place where people can go to find resources, to grow, to feel seen and respected no matter what their circumstances are. Margaret smiled. When can you start? I walked out of that building with a job, with a purpose, and with something I had thought I had lost forever, a renewed sense of my own worth. That evening, Everett and I celebrated with dinner at a little restaurant downtown. Sitting across from him, I realized I had finally stepped into a new chapter of my life. I sat across from my son, studying the man he had become. Strong, steady, the kind of man any mother would be proud to call her own. A warmth bloomed in my chest, pride so deep it almost hurt. You know, I said quietly, my voice catching with the weight of everything I meant, I think I owe Rome a thank you. Everett nearly choked on his water, coughing in disbelief. What? Mom, why on earth would you say that? I smiled, though it carried a trace of pain. If she hadn't forced me to see just how far I had fallen, how little I had been valuing myself, I might never have found the strength to stand back up again. He shook his head, his eyes filled with the kind of love only a son could carry for his mother. Mom, you've always been strong. No, I whispered, shaking my head firmly. I haven't. I've been surviving. And surviving isn't the same as living with strength. After your father died, after we lost the house, I accepted whatever scraps of dignity people tossed my way. I was so grateful for even the smallest kindness that I forgot I deserved to be treated well. For a moment, my thoughts drifted back to those 2 humiliating weeks in that basement room, to the weight of shame I carried every single day. I remembered the sting of that handprint across my cheek, the hollow ache of kneeling on the cold floor. And yet what stood out more than the pain was the look on Everett's face that day, his horror, his anger, his heartbreak when he walked in and saw me that way. That moment, I said softly, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Everett leaned in, his brow furrowed. What's that? That I raised you to be better than that, to stand up for what's right, to protect people who can't protect themselves, to honor character over convenience. I drew a shaky breath. And if I raised you to be that kind of man, then I must be that kind of woman too. Without hesitation, Everett reached across the table and clasped my hand tightly in his. His eyes shone, steady and certain. You are, Mom. You always have been. 2 months later, my life looked completely different. I had settled into my new job at the library, and every single day there felt like a gift. That place had become my sanctuary. I was valued for my knowledge, treated with a respect I had almost forgotten I was worthy of. And perhaps most surprising of all, I had found friendship. The other volunteers were a delightful mix: retired teachers, college students, young parents. What united us wasn't age or background, but a shared love of books, of learning, of the quiet joy that came from helping others discover worlds within pages. For the first time in years, I had a circle that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or someone's mother. One quiet afternoon, as I was arranging a display of newly arrived books, I heard a gentle voice behind me. Excuse me, it said. I was hoping to find out more about your volunteer literacy program. I turned and saw a distinguished man about my age. His silver hair caught the light, and behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were warm and kind. I'm Robert, he said, extending a hand with easy confidence. I just retired from teaching high school English, and thought I'd like to keep busy. Viola, I replied, smiling as I shook his hand. And I think we have several programs that could use someone with your experience. As I walked him through the various opportunities, I found myself unexpectedly enjoying our conversation. Robert spoke with a passion for education that reminded me of why I love the library so much. He was articulate but never arrogant, funny in a quiet, self-deprecating way that made me feel comfortable. As we wrapped up, he glanced at me with a hint of hesitation that made him almost boyish. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about your work here. For just a second, I hesitated. Then I smiled. I'd like that. That evening, I called Everett to tell him about my day, including the part about Robert and the coffee. Mom, that's great, he said immediately, and I could hear the smile in his voice, even through the phone. You deserve good things in your life. I laughed nervously. It's just coffee. It's a beginning, he corrected gently, and beginnings matter. After we hung up, I sat there holding the phone and realized he was right. This wasn't just the beginning with Robert. It was the beginning of me becoming someone new, someone who knew her worth, someone who would no longer accept less than she deserved, someone who understood the difference between merely surviving and truly living. That night, sitting in Everett's apartment, the place that had been my shelter for the past few months, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not only for the roof over my head, but for the journey that had brought me here, for the son who had stood up when I couldn't stand for myself, for the brutal wake-up call that had reminded me who I really was. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, opportunities, and unknowns. But tonight I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by love, strengthened by hardship, and ready for whatever came next. For the first time in longer than I could even remember, I was happy. 6 months later, I stood in the cozy kitchen of my very own apartment. Small, yes, just a bright little one-bedroom 10 minutes from the library. But it was mine. The sun was rising outside, painting the sky with pinks and golds as I brewed coffee for two. That morning ritual of gratitude swelled inside me again, warming me more than the coffee ever could. The furniture was secondhand, the curtains from a discount store, the table a little wobbly, but every piece, every plate, every book on the shelf had been chosen by me, paid for with money I had earned through my own work. After so many months of feeling like a burden at the mercy of other people's charity, this space felt nothing short of miraculous. Robert emerged from the bathroom, his silver hair damp from his shower. We had been dating for 4 months now, moving carefully, learning each other's histories, building trust with patience that only comes from people who understand that real love is worth waiting for. Coffee smells wonderful, he said warmly, pressing a quick kiss to the top of my head as he passed. I made your favorite, I replied, handing him a mug. Extra strong, just a touch of cream. It had become our Saturday morning routine. He stayed over Friday nights, and we spent Saturday mornings reading the newspaper together, trading thoughts on current events and sharing stories from our weeks. It was a quiet, gentle happiness, the kind I once thought was lost to me forever. Any plans for today? He asked, settling into the chair across from me. Everett's coming over for lunch, I said, unable to hide my smile. He says he has something to show me, but he's been mysterious about it all week. Robert chuckled knowingly. He had met Everett several times by then, and the two of them had built a deep respect for each other. Robert understood that my son would always be the most important man in my life, and Everett respected Robert for treating me with the tenderness and dignity I had always deserved. An hour later, Robert headed home to tend to his garden, and I spent the rest of the morning tidying up and preparing the lunch for Everett's visit. As I worked, I caught myself reflecting on just how much my life had shifted in a single year. The library hadn't only saved me financially, it had restored my sense of purpose. Helping people find what they needed, whether it was a job seeker searching for career guidance or an older patron learning how to use a computer, reminded me daily that I had value, that my experiences and wisdom were not burdens, but gifts I could offer the world. And beyond that, I had discovered something I never believed possible, that I was braver than I had ever imagined myself to be. The man's voice had turned sharp and cruel, his words cutting into one of the youngest volunteers. Without thinking, I stepped in, calm but firm, guiding him toward the exit and making it absolutely clear that cruelty would not be tolerated here. That was the moment it struck me, how much I had changed. The old version of myself, the Viola who once endured Romy's scorn simply because she thought she owed him for keeping a roof over her head, would never have had the courage to do that. Everett showed up at noon, a manila folder tucked under his arm, and that mischievous smile he always wore when he was planning something. I wrapped him in a tight hug. "What's in the folder?" I asked. "Patience, Mom. First we eat, then the surprise." So over grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, his childhood favorite, we talked about his week. The divorce from Romy had been finalized 3 months earlier, and though the wound hadn't fully closed, I could see lightness returning to him. He seemed more like the boy I raised and less like the troubled man who had once been tied to Romy's bitterness. "Have you heard from her?" I asked gently. We didn't bring her up often, but sometimes my curiosity slipped through. "Not directly," he said after a pause. "I heard she moved to California, got a job with some tech company. I hope she finds whatever it is she's looking for." Pride welled in me. It would have been so easy for him to cling to anger, to wish her unhappiness in return for all the harm she'd caused. But Everett chose a different path. He chose release, peace, a focus on what could be built instead of what had been broken. He finished his sandwich and set the plate aside. "Now, are you ready for your surprise?" When he opened the folder, my stomach tightened. Real estate listings. My mind leapt ahead, already defensive. I loved my apartment, loved the independence it symbolized. If he was going to try to convince me to leave it behind— "Everett," I interrupted, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm happy where I am." "I know you are, Mom. That's not what this is." He spread the pages out on the table. "These aren't for you. They're for me. Houses I could afford with my savings and military benefits. I want to buy one, a real house, with a yard, extra bedrooms, space for both of us." His eyes shone with an eager light as he leaned toward me. "I want us to live together again. Not because you need taking care of, but because I miss you, Mom. I miss having you in my life every day. We've always been a team. I don't want that to change." His words washed over me like warmth I hadn't realized I was aching for. My gaze drifted across the listings. I didn't just see houses, I saw futures. A garden where I could grow tomatoes and herbs like I once had. A wide kitchen where Robert could help me prepare dinner. A guest room ready for library friends who might stay the night. "But what about your future?" I asked. "What about when you meet someone new? When you want your own family?" "Then we'll figure it out when the time comes," he said with certainty. "Right now, this is what makes me happy." I looked at him, this generous, good-hearted man who had rescued me in more ways than he would ever know, and pride swelled in my chest. "Show me your favorites." That afternoon, we drove through neighborhoods, stopping at each house, debating porches and kitchens, weighing pros and cons, like partners making a joint decision. By evening, we stood in the living room of a modest 3-bedroom home with a wide front porch and a backyard just begging for summer barbecues. It wasn't grand, but it felt alive with promise. "This one feels right," I said. Everett smiled. "It feels like home." Later, over dinner with Robert, I nervously shared the news. Would he feel pushed aside? Would this new arrangement complicate what we were building together? "That's wonderful," Robert said immediately. "Everett's a good man, and besides," he grinned mischievously, "that house has a much better kitchen than your apartment. I'm looking forward to cooking in it." The way he assumed he was welcome, that our relationship would grow naturally within this new life, warmed me through. This, I thought, was what love looked like: supportive, flexible, expansive. 3 months later, we moved in. Everett claimed the master bedroom. I took the sunlit room overlooking the garden, and the third bedroom became a shared study where I could work on library projects while Everett kept up with his military paperwork. Our housewarming was simple, perfect. Robert brought wine and helped me set up the buffet. Margaret from the library arrived with her husband, and several of my volunteer friends came along. A few of Everett's military buddies showed up too, children in tow, and suddenly our quiet little house buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and overlapping conversations. From the back porch, I watched Robert kneel with a group of children, pointing out sparrows and finches, teaching them to recognize their songs. Everett stood by the grill, telling stories that made his friends roar with laughter. And there I stood, soaking it all in. This wasn't about the perfect house or the perfect family. It was about this, a life stitched together with respect, kindness, and genuine love. You look happy, Margaret said, stepping beside me. I am, I replied, and for the first time in years, the words carried no hesitation. For the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I belong. That night, after the guests had left and the dishes were done, Everett and I sat side by side on the porch swing, the stars gathering overhead. Do you ever regret it? I asked softly. The divorce, starting over, everything. He considered, his face thoughtful. I regret marrying someone who could be cruel to you. I regret not being there when you needed me most. But leaving her? No. In this? He gestured toward the house, the yard, the life unfolding around us. This feels right in a way that marriage never did. And when you meet someone new, I pressed, then she'll be someone who understands that you're part of the package. Someone who sees you as a blessing, not a burden. He smiled. Someone like Robert does. The thought made me smile too. Robert and I had already been talking about moving in together, taking that next step. Strangely, it didn't scare me. It thrilled me. A good sign, I thought. You know what the best part is? Everett continued. His gaze softened, watching you come back to yourself. The real you, not the version you thought you had to be to survive. He told me I deserved love. Those words carried me straight back to that awful day when Romy had struck me across the face. I remembered being on my knees, scrubbing a floor that was already spotless, accepting humiliation I didn't deserve simply because I had forgotten my own worth. I had almost lost myself completely in that darkness. I admitted softly that if he hadn't come home at that exact moment, I might never have found the strength to rise again. But he had come home, and because of that, I had found my way back. That was what mattered most. We sat together in easy silence after that, letting the night air settle around us. From somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A car rolled past with faint music drifting from its open windows. Just ordinary sounds. The soundtrack of people living their ordinary lives. And as I listened, it struck me that this, right here, was what happiness really was. Not the grand, sweeping gestures, not the dramatic declarations. It was evenings like this, sitting quietly on the porch with people who loved you. It was kitchen tables where you felt safe enough to show up exactly as you were. It was work that gave meaning to your days. It was relationships built on respect, not desperation. I love you, son, I whispered into the night. I love you too, Mom. Always, he replied. 6 months later, Robert and I stood in our backyard, exchanging vows in a small but deeply personal ceremony. Everett walked me down the makeshift aisle, his arms steady and sure, while Margaret from the library, my unexpected but cherished friend, stood as my maid of honor. It wasn't the wedding a younger version of me would have dreamed of, but for the woman I had become, it was perfect. By then I had learned the difference between love and need, between partnership and dependence. Under the shade of the oak tree in our yard, surrounded by the people who had become our chosen family, I thought of the long road that had carried me here, the losses, the humiliation, the nights when I doubted my worth, but also the awakening, the rediscovery of strength, and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of a life shaped by dignity instead of desperation. I promise, I said, meeting Robert's kind and steady gaze, to love you not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every single day I choose you. And I promise, he replied, his voice steady, to love the strong, independent woman you are, not a version of you that needs saving or fixing. Later that evening, after the celebration had wound down, I slipped into the quiet of the kitchen to tidy up. Through the window, I saw Everett and Robert out in the backyard, building a fire together in the pit, laughing over some shared joke. The sight filled me with such complete contentment that it almost stole the air from my lungs. My thoughts wandered briefly to Romy. I wondered if she had ever found whatever it was she had been chasing. I hoped she had learned, as I finally had, that real happiness could never be built on tearing others down. That love was never about control or manipulation, but about recognizing and celebrating the best in one another. Mostly, though, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for my son, who had stood tall for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. Gratitude for a second chance at love, something I had long ago stopped expecting. Gratitude for work that filled my days with meaning, and for the community that embraced me just as I was. I had lost a house, but I had gained a home. I had lost a false sense of security, but in its place I had found something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive anything, that I could rebuild from nothing, and that I could create a life worth living regardless of the circumstances life tried to define me by. At 65 years old, I was finally the woman I was always meant to be. And I realized in that quiet certainty that every hardship, every trial, every painful step had been worth it to arrive at this place. The future stretched before me, wide open and full of possibilities I couldn't yet name. Whatever it would bring, I knew I would face it with dignity, with love, and with the unshakable truth that I deserved every bit of happiness I could create. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.